Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Charmed Season 1, Episode 12, The Wendigo. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of exactly what happens within this episode. Phoebe is hired by Prue to be her assistant at Buckland's. However, while they're going through the items for an auction, Phoebe gets a premonition off of a bracelet, which then leads her to need to reunite a mother and daughter who the bracelet was the connection between. However, this of course impacts the auction and also Prue's job at Buckland's. Because of this, at the end of the episode, Phoebe decides to quit as she can't guarantee that it won't happen again, and she decides that Buckland's is more Prue's world and not for her. We then have the main plot of the episode, which is that Piper gets attacked by a Wendigo and is scratched by it. She then starts showing signs of illness and transformation until eventually she becomes a Wendigo as well. It is then learned that in order to cure Piper, they have to kill the Wendigo who scratched her. And luckily, again, thanks to Phoebe's premonitions, they figure out who that is, and they do kill the original Wendigo, which cures Piper, and also saves Andy's life, who was lined up to be the next victim. So after watching the episode, we now will rank the episode. I rank on two separate lists. The first one is a mostly objective ranking, which is meant to be void of emotion, though bias and judgment can still apply. And then on the personal ranking, which is entirely emotion based on how I felt about the episode and my opinion on it. So starting with our mostly objective rank values, we will start with the positives of the episode. So the first positive of the episode was the single episode supporting character introductions, and there were two supporting characters in this case. There was Billy Waters, whose fiance was killed by the Wendigo a couple of months previous, and he has been hunting it ever since. And then there is a special FBI agent, Ashley Fallon, who is investigating the string of murders caused by the Wendigo. However, spoiler, she is the Wendigo. So, had she not attacked Piper, she probably never would have been caught. Each of these is worth 1 point, 1 point per character. So that brings us up to 2. And then we have our next positive, which is worth 4 points, and this is the world building that took place within this episode, where we learn that it is not only are there other magical creatures that exist in the world, but that it is possible in some cases for the sisters to be turned into these magical creatures. And obviously, in this case, the magical creature that we find out exists is the Wendigo, and Piper is almost turned into one permanently and is turned into one temporarily. We also learn that it is possible when turning into these creatures, if the requirement is met, that it can be reversed. So in the case of the Wendigo, the requirement was that they melt the heart of ice of the original Wendigo, which will vanquish it, therefore allowing Piper to return back to her human form. And that brings us to 6 so far. I do want to honorably mention some relationship progress between Andy and Prue. Obviously, it's not enough to be considered relationship development on the chart. However, at the end of the episode, Andy did see what attacked him, which was the Wendigo. therefore that the supernatural does exist. And when he off screen talks to Prue about it, she doesn't deny what happened. She basically tells him, yeah, what you saw was real. And luckily, the Wendigo has been vanquished, so he doesn't have to worry about it anymore. And she indicates that, not sure how he feels about it. He has to kind of go off and think about that, but that she feels good about it being like the most honest conversation that they've had. And Phoebe is the one who brings up the fact that maybe potentially Andy, having more time to process, may not feel as poorly about Prue being a witch as they had previously thought from The Truth Is Out There and It Hurts. And Prue agrees that that may be the case. Of course, there is no progression. They aren't getting back together at this point. They're still broken up. It doesn't count on the chart, but I did want to honorably mention it because it was some change in the relationship to what had previously existed, just not enough to count for points. And then the negative of this episode was that there was a failed emotional impact. So as I had mentioned before, the subplot of this episode was Phoebe getting a job with Prue. She gets a premonition off of a bracelet that's inscribed with initials TL. The premonition shows a car accident in the past. She then goes and looks up the car accident, discovers that it was a private investigator who was searching for a child that was kidnapped by her own father on the behalf of her mother. However, when this accident occurred, the bracelet, which was proof that the daughter had been found, was thrown from the car. He died in the accident, was never able to tell the mother, therefore they were never reunited. And so Phoebe spends the first half of the episode kind of doing some research into finding the daughter, and once she finds the daughter, she and Prue then bring the daughter to the mother to reunite them. And on the surface, in just a purely objective way, it is a nice scene. Like, it is a beautiful reunion between a parent and their child that they were separated from. It is a good thing. However, there are different types of people in the world, and some people, in order to care about something or someone, need to know them, need to feel some form of connections, need to have learnt about them. I'm one of those people. I can't just look at someone I've seen on screen for like 2 minutes and be like, oh my gosh, I feel what you're feeling, or I feel for you. I need more of a buildup. I need to build a bond so that I can care about what's happening. Fact of the matter is, it was basically brief premonition, some research, and then all of a sudden, oh, they're together. Yay, let's go home. It was a very short time on screen. The reunion was maybe like 2-3 minutes tops on screen. It didn't hit emotionally. Like, like I said, you can logically acknowledge that it's a very beautiful thing that's happened, that it's a very good thing that's happened, but acknowledging that something is good and feeling that like emotional response to it are two different things. And I did not get any sort of emotional response towards the reunion beyond a surface level, "Oh, that's sweet," but it didn't impact me in any way. That's what I'm trying to get at. Which, of course, is overall a negative because the people who wrote the show would have been trying to emotionally impact you with that scene. And since that failed, that brings this episode objectively to a 3 out of 10. And so a reminder of our mostly objective rankings so far within season 1. In first place, we have Something Wicca This Way Comes, I've Got You Under My Skin, Wicca Envy, Dead Man Dating, Feats of Clay, Dream Sorcerer, The Witch is Back, Thank You for Not Morphing, The Truth Is Out There and It Hurts. This episode, The Wendigo fell into 10th place, and then The Wedding from Hell and The Fourth Sister in last. So now it's time for the personal ranking, which is basically how I felt about the episode. Full disclosure, this isn't the strongest episode in the series. I felt detached from it while I was watching it, kind of like you were thinking about other things. There were a few moments that really captured my attention, but for the most part, it was kind of like if I wasn't making this video, it probably would have been background noise while I played like a game on my phone or did something else and just kind of listened to it, half watched it. It didn't make me feel engaged in the episode, so it wasn't the strongest. There are plenty more strong ones. There have been plenty stronger ones that we've already watched. There's many more coming. So overall, it's not a strong episode. Some of the strong points I found was at the very beginning of the episode, before she's attacked, Piper gets a flat tire. Phoebe is trying to basically walk her through how to fix this flat tire because she dated a mechanic once and therefore is an expert. And she basically is telling her how to use the jack, but Piper can't find the handle for the jack, so she decides to try a wooden spoon, which pretty much immediately breaks, which of course worries Prue and Phoebe because she's out in the dark, and basically all she has to defend herself with is a broken spoon at this point. But Piper assures them she can freeze things, so obviously that's better than mace, she says. However, then when she is attacked, she's unfortunately, I mean, in a phone booth. And because she is in the phone booth, having been trying to call for a tow truck or CA assistance or, for the insurance, her phone died. Like her cell phone died. She was in the phone booth. That's when she's attacked. Her power only works in the room she's in at this point, which means, of course, that it was freezing only anything that was in the phone booth, and the Wendigo was not in the phone booth, hence why she got scratched. Luckily, Billy Waters shows up and drives away the Wendigo. So that's basically the wooden spoon part is the funny part, and that was very entertaining. It is interesting because it is the first time that we are seeing a magical creature. Of course, because we're rewatchers, we know that there are far better examples of magical creatures that are more aesthetically pleasing as well coming up. So again, it's cool because it's the first time. It's a milestone in the series, the first time Piper transforms into something, and that's worth noting, obviously. We then, of course, have Piper getting the wound treated, told to go to her doctor the next day. She refuses to, and she starts to show various signs of transformation. Now, throughout this, she decides to go to work while she's sweating profusely and clearly having some sort of fever attack. And coincidentally, there's a health inspector that shows up that day, finds her pressing meat to her face in the freezer. Of course, it's packaged meat, so she's not directly pressing the meat to her face, but it's like you're in a restaurant, you can't be doing that. Even the health inspector's like, unless you want me to shut this place down, get lost, essentially. And I do wonder about that fever because part of the lore of the Wendigo in this is that it's a scorned lover who, being scorned by their lover, decides to rip their former lover's heart out and eat it. And this in turn turns their heart to ice, which then causes them to turn into a Wendigo during the 3 days of the full moon, the day before, during, and after the full moon. And they then are compelled to feed on human hearts to survive as the creature um, forevermore. So, if her heart is turning to ice, why does she have a fever? Like, why is she heating up? I feel like she should instead have been shivering, like sweating because she's shaking so much. Like, she shouldn't have been hot. She should have been cold because her heart, as she turns into Wendigo, is freezing over. I feel like it was a missed opportunity. I feel like they could have done that better. It just didn't make sense to me why she had a fever. I mean, you could say fever infection. She's being infected by the Wendigo, but I feel still a lot of times, even when you have infections, sometimes you get the chills, you get shivers, and in this case, because the heart is meant to freeze over, she should have been cold, in my opinion. But then later on in the episode, you also get like the wound growing hair around it, even though she hasn't transformed yet, which of course is what sets off alarm bells with Prue and Phoebe, who are like, okay. And then she also gets an attitude, and then her eyes go yellow, and then eventually they decide to chain her with Phoebe's handcuffs to a pipe. However, once she becomes the Wendigo, she breaks the pipe really easily. Bit of a bill there, but luckily they have Leo to fix it, hopefully. He'll return and do so. We then, to kind of round off this whole Piper part of it, the Wendigo, she really cleans up well. Basically, basically, they go to save Andy, who's the next victim lined up, on a stakeout with Agent Fallon, who is the Wendigo. She transforms, she attacks him, but Rue and Phoebe show up, scaring her off before she can actually rip his heart out. They find him, confirm he's alive, start shooting flares into the woods, but they don't manage to hit her, and then they see that there are two of them. So Phoebe then takes a chance and shoots at random. Luckily, even though she shot at Piper, Piper still had enough witch in her to freeze the flare, which then allows Prue to move it into the frozen Fallon Wendigo and burn her heart. And when she burns her heart, she basically kind of bubbles and boils up before poofing away into smoke. And what's even more important is that Piper returns to human, and Andy's wound also bubbles and smokes a bit, and then it heals itself, leaving basically no scar, no trace that he was almost had his heart ripped out, which shows that it like usually when the bad guy dies, they clean up after themselves, or they'll leave a residue depending on what type of baddie they are. But normally, like if a victim is injured, it doesn't automatically heal itself. So I felt like the Wendigo went above and beyond in healing Andy as well. It was very nice of it. I also found that Andy and Agent Fallon almost had more chemistry than Andy and Prue have to date, and they were not even really meant to be flirting. Like, I mean, they were because like the music in the background was very much implying that it was supposed to be like a sultry scene, and they were flirting a little bit back and forth, but not seriously. Andy ultimately rejects her when she's talking about physical intimacies and how that's the only thing she's interested in because her fiance back in the day broke her heart and basically cleaned out the apartment, left a note saying sorry, dumping her before they could be married. All very sad for her. Of course, her reaction to it limits the sympathy that you can feel for her. And that was great. And then I mentioned a bit about the lack of emotion from the subplot. And I think I've decided that one of the reasons that is as well is usually when you're telling a story, back in the day when I took a creative writing course, one of the things that they always mention is try wherever possible to show, not tell. And I felt maybe also one of the reasons why the emotion didn't hit is that it really was much more of a tell than a show. They basically were telling us what was happening because Phoebe was telling us what her premonition meant, telling us about her research, telling us what they were going to do. And like the show part, like I said, was like 2 to 3 minutes tops of this reunion. And that, because it was detached, also would have made the emotion of the scene also feel a little bit more detached. I feel like had they spent more time fleshing out the mother-daughter characters and how important it would be to them, who they were as people, why we're rooting for them, etc., etc., it probably would have hit more than just being absent from the scenario, hearing Phoebe just relay the facts of it, and then just that brief scene. I wanted to call that out because I just thought of it. There's also the Billy Waters character who obviously saves Piper, had his fiancée killed by the Wendigo, found out it was afraid of fire because he had chased it off with a burning log, unfortunately too late. And at first, I'm behind him. I think he seems like a really sweet character. However, then he starts flirting with Piper and then tells her, "You remind me of my dead fiancé." And it's like, it's been 2 months. You supposedly went on this hunt because you were so in love with her that her loss is so damaging to you that you've now dedicated your life to finding this creature. And the first pretty girl that you meet, you're flirting with her, comparing her to your dead fiancé. I just felt that was a bit ick. From a female perspective, I'm like, if you're in love, be in love. And I do believe that you can love more than one person. I'm just like, if you're trying to claim that that your fiance Laura meant so much to you that you're willing to dedicate your life to finding her killer and giving up your job, your previous life, etc., etc., flirting with the first person that comes along less than 2 months later, it ruins that love story. Like, the one thing I've noticed with the show and rewatching, they don't they ruin their love stories. They can't keep it purely emotional. They have to keep putting in, for whatever reason, ick moments that just ruin it. And I don't know why. And I never noticed this until I was rewatching for the purpose of these videos, when I was paying more attention than I usually do, that this is a trend at this point. Luckily, not so much in the main couples, more so with their single episode love affairs, which makes it forgivable, and probably why it went unnoticed before. But basically, right after he's flirted, he then goes to Fallon, tries to light a cigarette, she freaks out at the lighter, he realizes what she is, and then dies. So his role isn't that great or big in this episode. However, saying all of that, there was more negatives than positives. Overall, like I said, it was an episode that I felt attached to while I was watching, and for those reasons, I have also agreed with the objective ranking in this case, and personally, I ranked it a 3 as well. And as a reminder of our season 1 ranking so far for the personal ranking, my current favorite of the season is Dead Man Dating. Second is The Witch is Back. Wicca Envy in third. The Truth is Out There and It Hurts. Something Wicca This Way Comes. Dream Sorcerer. Feats of Clay. Thank You for Not Morphing. I've Got You Under My Skin. This episode, The Wendigo, falls into 10th place. The Wedding from Hell is in 11th. And The Fourth Sister is, as always, in last. And so we come to our series rankings overall. I'm happy to note that we are officially past the halfway point of the series. Not the series, sorry, the season. Series is still very long. There's 8 seasons. However, in this series ranking, there's 22 episodes in season 1. We're now on episode 12. And after adding the score of 3 to the mostly objective ranking, we have 73 out of 220. And on the personal side, adding 3 there as well, we now have 74 out of 220. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Charmed Season 1, Episode 12, The Wendigo. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.